And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, we've got some news on the offensive coordinator front. It's come with a mixed bag of reviews early on by fans. You and I are going to give our thoughts on that and what we think about this hiring, how we think that the positives, negatives, and how things are going to ultimately play out. Steelers are down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, scouting down there. We're going to talk about that. We're going to devote most of the show, though, obviously, to the biggest news this week, and that is Arthur Smith is the new offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He follows up Matt Canada for the past 3 years, who followed up Randy Fichtner the 3 years before that, Shayne. So not necessarily a high bar to clear here.
Yeah, and the initial reaction, we'll talk about that more once we get into what we think about the hire, what fans thought about the hire. But this is the type of move that fits all the categories that they said they're going to look for. But I still think fans, and I think us as well, we're not expecting it to be this particular experienced offensive coordinator, right? And I've already seen people say like, "Oh, Steelers fans don't know what they want. You give them what they want, and then they say it's not that though; it's something else." And like, there's some truth to that for sure with any fan base, but this hire definitely was not one that was on my radar coming into it.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that on Sunday, I believe, I'm like, okay, I think that there's a lot of truth to this because it does match what Tomlin is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll get into that here in just a second. We're going to spend most of the show on that. But let's talk about Tomlin and Omar Khan being down at the Senior Bowl for a second. Not surprising to see them there. This is the scouting trail, the beginning of it. And this is what Tomlin always used to do every single year with Kevin Colbert. And now he's kind of Colbert's passed that torch to Omar Khan. And so it's Tomlin and Khan down at the Senior Bowl. What are you looking for from them this week?
I think it's going to be really interesting because we've seen in the past, these guys are not always the best at hiding what they like, right? Hiding what they want, especially Tomlin and Colbert in the past. Khan, maybe a little bit more so. I think he's probably not going to be as forthcoming and as obvious about maybe what he's looking to accomplish at the different circuits, whether it's the All-Star games like this or the Combine, Pro Days. Mm-hmm. But we know Mike kind of makes it known based on who he's looking at, who he's focusing on down there. Like, we'll know, we already probably do know from what I've seen a little bit of information about what they're looking at down in Mobile, at least.
Yeah, it's been so obvious in the past to narrow down these selections. And even last year, like we knew, like I'd created that same checklist too. And so Broderick was very high on there. And so I wasn't surprised to see him be the pick. I'd like to see them be a little bit more subtle with
it's always nice
what they're doing. But I don't think, I think if we examined enough from any team, we could probably narrow down their
there's definitely
well. So
there's some crossover there.
And honestly, the NFL, they probably have a really good idea of what their plans are for the draft if they do any of their own research there. So we'll break down that here in just a second as well, because the Senior Bowl always interests me every year. We're going to talk about some of the standout players from there and who the Steelers could potentially be targeting. Art Rooney's comments is the last thing. News item that I want to touch on today, Shayne, and he addressed the media. This was just before the offensive coordinator hiring was decided, or at least we didn't know at the time. Maybe he already knew, and so he talked and basically said, "I've had enough." And that, I mean, paraphrasing here, he's had enough of this playoff drought. He's sick of going 7 years without a playoff win. He wants that to change. But the other thing that I noted from that I thought was really interesting, Shayne, was Rooney made it very clear that the offensive coordinator decision was Mike Tomlin's and Mike Tomlin's alone. Like, this responsibility falls on him. And to me, I don't know if it's like he's washing his hands of this as to not be any part of it at all in case it goes bad, or if he's just saying, I trust Tomlin and I want him to take free reins here.
I think it was more so the second one, of course. You hope so, at least. Again, like with most owners, right? Most of these guys, when they're making these hiring decisions, you don't want them to be the ones to just look at this guy and say, oh, I would just want this guy, right? Because they're not going to know what to look for exactly. It's supposed to be a team effort, a collaborative effort. And I'm sure that it was not just Tomlin that made this decision. I'm sure that everyone was involved in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, Tomlin is going to be the one who has to coach with him, right? He's going to be the one that has to allow him to run the offense the way that guy sees fit, hopefully. So ultimately, this decision was always going to be down to Tomlin at the end of the day. If there was multiple options, I'm sure they went back and forth. But this, again, was always going to be his say at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, this is what most teams allow their head coach to do.
Right.
But it makes me wonder, like, Shayne, in the back of Art's mind, was he like,
Mhm.
it
Just in
didn't work out
case.
very well with
Yeah,
Randy. It
just in
didn't work
case.
out very well with Matt. I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, no, I think that there was never any question that Tomlin was going to
No.
make this decision here. And that's one that we're going to break down here in just a second. The Still Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure you use promo code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. All right, Shayne, let's talk Arthur Smith for you. Those of you joining us here now, you might have some preconceived notions about Arthur Smith. We probably did as well. Obviously, Shayne and I have been looking a lot into him since this signing has occurred. And so we're going to break down everything we know, the good and the bad, and we're going to answer some questions here for you. And so I want to get your initial reaction here, Shayne, because when I was scouring Twitter right after this happened, like, it seems like in a lot of, I mean, it's not surprising to see fans like just far one way or the other. And that's what it seemed like to me. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of the media was on the side of, oh, this is a great hiring. He's going to bring a lot to the table in the running game, etc. Whereas a lot of the fan base was like, I hate this. How could Steelers do this? I mean, it's much of the same. It's repetitive. The Steelers are already a good running team. So what was your initial reaction when you heard the Arthur Smith news?
So my initial reaction was especially because I saw that they were interviewing him. I was not surprised that they ultimately decided on him, right? Because again, he meets all the requirements that was discussed heavily by Tomlin and by kind of the whole staff of the Steelers. They wanted someone with experience. They wanted somebody who ideally could fit what they wanted to do offensively, which of course we know what that is now more than ever. We know what they're trying to accomplish on offense. And again, he has the experience. I know that he, I think this is where the negative side of things come in for fans is there's a lot of recency bias with this kind of reaction, right? His tenure with the Falcons was not very good overall, right? He made some really bad decisions. He made some personnel errors. Like, there's definitely things to be concerned about from his time with the Falcons. But if you go back to the last time he was calling plays only, not having to focus on what players he had to use, but just trying to play the best he can with what he had, he's had a lot of success, right? So I think it's definitely a mixed bag in general as a hire. My initial reaction was not one of surprise. It was more so, okay, this fits, unfortunately, and we'll get into why it's a little bit unfortunate. I think we both kind of have similar feelings about the negative side of things on this, but it wasn't surprising.
Yeah, I was leaning a little bit more on the negative side. I think maybe just initial reaction and things, but I think that this totally depends to me. I think, what Art Smith are you getting here? Like, are you getting the guy who coached the Falcons and called the plays, mind you, for the last 3 years, in an offense that averaged 19.6 points per game over a 3-year span? In comparison, Matt Canada's offense averaged 18.7 a game. And so less than a point difference if we're judging it by that category. But also, I think if you go back and look at his time, that 2-year stint as the offensive coordinator of the Titans, I think there was tremendous success there with that offense. I mean, he scored close to 30 points per game in 1 year, 24.9 in the other, and was just incredibly successful at running the football. And when he did pass, it wasn't often, but when he did pass, the passing game was very efficient and very successful that way. And they did in 2019, I believe they did make a playoff push. The other one ended in 1 year drought. A 1 year just in the wild card round, they scored 13 points and were bounced by the Ravens. And so he's kind of dealt with some of the similar things that the Steelers have dealt with. So I feel like it was an interesting hire. I think that you can do far worse. I think this is like, he gives you that baseline, at least, where you know that you're going to get a good running offense. That is something he's had in all 5 seasons where he's been calling the shots. And so the next question I want to ask you then, Shayne, is this the right move for the Steelers? Is this what they needed?
So this is the crux of the issue, and I think this is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about with some of our next questions, and also this one in particular. Is I do not think that this hire is bad per se. I don't think that he's a bad offensive coordinator option, but I don't think he was the right offensive coordinator option, right? And this is where you start having to get into philosophy, and we're going to get more into that later. But the Steelers clearly, the thing that they're missing the most, and granted, it's probably more of a quarterback thing at this point with who we have under center, but the passing game is so underdeveloped that the running game, as good as it was even this year, right? It just isn't enough in these high leverage, high profile playoff type games, right? You're not beating the Bills running the football at the rate we are running it at and not being able to execute in the passing game, right? At some point, you're going to have to do that. I will say Smith has had success building a passing game off of his run game, but the problem is, similar to a lot of other offensive coordinators who have that focus that aren't in like the Shanahan, McVay tier of guys, it's really hard for them to develop a drop back passing game that isn't reliant on play action, isn't reliant on the run game being successful. Those guys just don't have very well fleshed out passing offenses because they don't want to throw the ball consistently, right? They want to be able to lean on the run game. So if he isn't going to bring a more sophisticated drop back passing game with him to the Steelers, even though we will have more success offensively, I think by default, just because he's going to have better play calls, he's going to use these guys better. I worry, and again, we're going to get more into the crux of this later, but I worry that it isn't going to be enough once we get to the playoffs, especially if we are good enough to go back there next year.
Yeah, that's where my mind went as well, Shayne. I'm like, this decision lines up exactly with what Tomlin wants, right? He run the football, take good care of the football, and then just let your defense do the work on their side. But it's like, what was the one thing that was working for the Pittsburgh Steelers last year? What was the one thing that they were good at was running the ball? You bring in an offensive coordinator whose specialty is running the football, something that the Steelers are already one of the better teams in the league at, and they've got one of the better running back duos in football right now. Where they struggle immensely is in the passing game, and they couldn't muster up like 180 passing yards a game, and you don't get a guy that's going to help you a lot in that regard. And so for reference, in Arthur Smith's career, 5 years total of calling plays, either as an offensive coordinator or as a head coach, he's never amassed 225 yards per game passing the football, which is a relatively low bar. And if that were a ranking in terms of like 2023 rankings, Shayne, it would have been 18th in the NFL. So his best season of 5 years would have been 18th in the NFL this season. So now I know it's not all just about volume. Like you can have a high volume passing offense and not be efficient at it. He was efficient at it in Tennessee, but is it enough? And this is where the philosophy comes in again, Shayne. So if your plan is to run the football effectively, what happens when you get down by 10 points against the Bills or the Chiefs? Like one of those teams, do you have the firepower to fight back into a game? And this is the issue that I have. I think the problem with Arthur Smith is he's just not going to be a coordinator who's going to run solid pass concepts and go out there in 11 personnel out of shotgun and be able to fight his way back into a football game. Like you have to stay in the game throughout. And part of doing that is you run the ball a lot and you don't take a lot of risk with the football. And I think that's it in a way, though, it limits the offense much like it has been since like 2017 when Todd Haley wasn't here. And so I think that could cause some issues when it comes to the ceiling of this offense. And the ceiling has been so low for so long. I don't know how much it increases the ceiling having somebody like Arthur Smith. I think it increases the floor. I think the baseline is there. I think that you're getting 9 to 11 wins with him probably as the offensive coordinator. You're going to get a successful run game, but I just don't know how much it increases the ceiling.
Yeah, that's ultimately the issue is the ceiling of this offense is what we've been missing, right? Like you want to have the ability to take the top off the defense if you can, especially with the playmakers we do have on offense, right? Like it's not like we're lacking in skill position talent, right? If that was the case, I could excuse some of the issues we've had over the past couple of years, but that's just clearly not the case. I mean, George Pickens had 1,000 yards and averaged like 18 yards a catch in an offense that couldn't do anything half the time. Like we clearly have the guys out there. Even Deontay had a solid year when he was healthy. Like we have the skill position talent. And this is where the hiring is an issue for me is he going to develop these guys? Is he going to get more out of them than we've been able to get out of them? Probably, but not to the level that you would have wanted as a Steelers fan, I don't think.
Yeah, I know. I think that's where we are right now, at least. And so let's dissect this further, Shayne, and talk about what Arthur Smith brings to the table, exactly what is his forte, his niche, and then where are the areas that he struggles. And we touched on it a little bit already, but he runs a zone and a wide zone running scheme, and it's been so successful in the past. Obviously, it helps when during his time in Tennessee, you've got a running back like Derrick Henry, like a generational monster at that position. But he did aid Henry towards a 2,000 rushing yard season with 17 rushing touchdowns. I mean, they were the best running team in the league, and they were an incredibly efficient offense overall because of how successful the running game was. They were able to really use that to set up the play action pass. And this is the part that I think that has me a little bit excited, at least, would be the play action game, something the Steelers have really struggled with in the past. If you can get that play action going and get guys running free across the middle of the field because you pull the ball out every once in a while, and because the running game is so successful, I think that's going to open things up. And what it did for Arthur Smith's offense in the past is it made them very efficient on a per pass basis. Like Ryan Tannehill had the best seasons of his career, averaged like 9.2 yards an attempt or something ridiculous, which is just like an absurd number. And so I feel like if we can't expect that type of efficiency from the Steelers and what they have to work with right now. But I think there's encouragement there. So what else do you want to add to that, Shayne?
I mean, pretty much just kind of branching off what you said, he is a heavy formation guy, right? Like his heavy formations make up the majority of his offense. And so if you're a Darnell Washington guy, if you like him, if you like Jaylen Warren, because I think he's a better wide zone runner, those two are probably going to be having career years, you'd imagine. Washington, obviously, in the second year is different, but there's going to be a lot of heavy personnel. I expect them to, and I've heard this talked about from a couple other guys too, like there's probably going to be a fullback brought in unless they think Hayward can handle that role full time, which maybe if he can, that's fine too. But there's going to be a lot of heavy formations, a lot of 22, 13, 12 personnel, like pretty much any heavy formation you can imagine. There's going to be a lot of that, I imagine. And it's probably going to be successful in the run game, especially, right? In the play action game too, you brought it up. It's very well fleshed out. Like he's going to be able to find open space with the play action game. And I've heard mixed reviews from different people about this. And like, I lean kind of in the middle of this, where if it's Kenny Pickett under center, right? If he ends up being the starting quarterback for this team, he was successful on play action by the numbers, but the problem is a lot of the success came on throwing it short still, even off of play action. He was not taking shots from play action. He was averaging still like 6 or 7 yards per attempt on play action, which is not great. You don't want to be averaging 6 or 7 yards in attempts on play action, because the whole reason you do that is you try to create open space and big plays down the field. So it's still, I think, a good fit for him overall, because they need to see if he can do that type of thing. But again, there's a lot of positives to Arthur Smith. Like, I think this is where Steelers fans need to understand, like, the offense is going to be better almost assuredly by a significant margin. The question is, how much is it going to matter when you have to go through the AFC ultimately, when your goal is to get to the Super Bowl, right? Rooney talked about it in his press conference. He wants to go back into the playoffs and win games. He wants to compete for Super Bowls again. To me, this is not the hire you make to do that. It's to just get to a point where you have a better chance of maybe winning a playoff game or two.
Yeah, I think that this does one thing for sure, Shayne. I think it's going to probably solidify that Tomlin doesn't have to worry about his non-losing streak ending, because I do think that Arthur Smith is good enough to get to that level. His baseline play is going to be good enough. Now, I know that he went 7-10 each of the past 3 years as the head coach of the Falcons, but when he has to solely focus on the coordinator side of things, I think that's going to offer some stability to that offense. The other interesting thing, Shayne, is he likes guys that play really physical, really downhill and aggressive. And so it makes me wonder, like, who's going to fit with the program and who isn't. Like, is he going to like the blocking that Deontay Johnson offers out there, or a George Pickens? Is there going to be an effort issue at all? Pat Freiermuth might be the biggest question mark here, because I think that Freiermuth, probably in the back of his mind, he was hoping for a guy that would come in and run like a bunch of 11 personnel, where he can be out wide or out in the slot as like the joker tight end, that true move tight end. How much is he going to be asked to play in line? Something we know that he has not been very good at for the Steelers, and that is not how he wins at all. And so I'm interested to see how he fits in the mold here. What's this going to do for his career trajectory? And so it's just a lot of different pieces. Like, there's some ones that you can kind of tell, like with Darnell Washington, like this is a perfect fit for him. And if he can't get it here, then maybe he's not the prospect that we thought he was going to be. But and the other thing I think that it tells you, Shayne, the Steelers are going to value the offensive line in this
Yes.
NFL draft. If they don't go big in free agency on it, I think they're going to be looking heavily at the offensive line, knowing that they need a tackle, knowing that they need a center. I mean, the offensive line is something that the Titans valued when he was there. It's something that he valued during his time in Atlanta. And so I think that that's a pretty safe assumption there as well. Shayne, I want to talk about the philosophy, the team philosophy overall here. And this is something that I've written a few articles about over the past few months here. My thought, and I want to know if you share the same thought that I do right now, is I feel like obviously it's really hard to find a franchise quarterback, right? Like if it came easy to everybody would be in playoff contention all the time. And so goes to show how difficult it is and how has been for the Steelers since Ben Roethlisberger. And so that's one factor there. But the philosophy in general of just saying, we're going to run well, we're going to play defense, we're going to not turn the ball over. Does that cut it in today's NFL anymore? Knowing the type of quarterback play that is out there, knowing how hard it is to get to that biggest stage on turf, to get to that Super Bowl again, is that a recipe to get you back to the Super Bowl? Can you do it that way, or do you need more than that?
That's a really good question, and I've seen a lot of Steelers fans, particularly who've been trying to defend this hire, say that most of the top teams in the NFL this year who made the playoffs, who went far in the playoffs, they had top 10 run games, right? There's some of the best run teams in the NFL. The problem is pretty much every one of them, minus maybe the 49ers, but they're kind of a unique example. They all have developed effective drop back passing games that they can go to offset any issues they may have in the playoffs if they can't get the run game going. And that's the ultimate issue. Is it's not that you can't have a focus on the run game, you can't have a focus on defense. It's that at the end of the day, if your quarterback cannot drop back 30, 40 times in a playoff game when the opposing quarterback is Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, or even on a day where they actually decide, ironically, to run the ball a little bit more, Lamar Jackson also probably could have been in that discussion too, because their game plan was a whole mess, which that's a whole other conversation. But again, against those teams who also probably have really good defenses, who also have running games that are good, the quarterback then becomes the deciding factor in those playoff games a lot of the time. Like Mahomes, again, they scored 17 points, but he scored the points that mattered. He made the plays that mattered down the stretch of the game. The throw to MVS to ice it, like stuff like that. You need that as part of your game plan. And if you don't have it, it's a roll of the dice instead of having an actual legitimate shot. You're just hoping that, Mahomes has a bad game, which just doesn't really happen in the playoffs. Or Josh Allen throws the ball to you a couple times, which he didn't do this year when we played him, right? Like it's such a limiting factor whenever you're banking on your defense to show up every week, essentially, your running game to show up every week. It has to be a balance of everything at the very least, or if it's not going to be a balance, you want it to skew then towards the passing game of the quarterback because that's more repeatable generally. It's really hard to stop a really great quarterback. Some teams, if they commit enough resources, they can stop your run game.
Yeah, you use the run to set up the pass, not the other way around. And I think the issue that the Steelers have is they think that they can get by just doing that. And you mentioned those examples right there. You have to be able to have the firepower. And I look at it this way, Shayne. I feel like, let's say the Steelers get into the playoffs again as one of those wild card spots, maybe even win the division. And so, but let's say, assume for this example, if you get in as a wild card spot, you need to win 3 straight games to go to the Super Bowl. You need to win 4 straight games to become Super Bowl champions, which is the ultimate goal. And it should be for all 32 teams. What is the likelihood that you can win 4 straight games to become the Super Bowl champions in the postseason if you can't pass the football enough, or if you get down and you don't have the ability to have enough firepower on offense to manage in the passing game? You're going to get down in the playoffs. I mean, it's just the way it is. If the Steelers were able to play all throughout the playoffs in the Super Bowl without ever trailing, like that would be miraculous. So knowing that you're going to get down, you have to have an ability to fight your way back into a football game. And I worry that with Arthur Smith, I worry that with the philosophy in general the Steelers have operated under since Ben's later years, or even the departure of Ben, that it's just not going to be enough to get you to the ultimate goal, which is to win on the biggest stage on turf. And so I feel like if that's the case, then what are we doing here? Like, are we content with just getting to that 9 to 11 win mark, maybe getting a playoff win? And I feel like a great example of this is the Tennessee Titans. When Arthur Smith was there as the offensive coordinator, the offense was very, very efficient. The running game was the best in the league. And they were able to win 2 playoff games following the 2019 season, but their season came to a screeching halt when they only were able to score 16 points and were bounced against the I think that one, I'm thinking of getting my games mixed up. That might have been a 24-point game, but they still lost by 10 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Then the following year, they were bounced with like a 13-point game.
Yeah, the
And
Ravens beat them,
yeah. And so I feel like eventually you're going to find that team that you just can't go toe to toe with because your passing game isn't good enough. Like, this is a passing league, and the rules are engineered to aid the passing league. Like, there's a lot of, you can't do much as defensive backs. And so I feel like the Steelers aren't taking advantage of how much of a passing league this is. And they're still trying to rely heavily on the run. And then that's okay. But I think that you have to at least have the firepower to, when you get down, and you will in the postseason, you have to be able to fight back in these games. And this is what worries me. I would much, much rather, Shayne, personally, I'd much rather have the Steelers be the team that can pass the ball great and can't run the ball very efficiently, rather than the other way around, because I think there's way more success and it translates to points a lot more when you can pass the ball and effectively, and do so in the red zone as well, rather than just run the ball effectively.
Yeah, totally agree there. I think that's, again, it's until, and when we talk about our next thing, I will bring up something else to kind of, because I can already feel the wheels turning in a lot of fans' head if they were to watch this or just hear this. Like, there's a factor at play here that we have to consider, but still, that is the mentality you have to have if you want to win in the playoffs. It has to be at least the ability to. Maybe you don't want to do it all the time. Maybe you are really good at running the ball. You don't want to have to ask your quarterback to do too much. That's okay. But when it comes down to it, can you ask them to go win you the game in the air? And if you don't think you can do that, you're going to be behind the 8 ball, especially in the AFC right now.
Yeah, and we talked about the passing numbers already. I mean, like I said, never more than 225 passing yards on average for a season average, which again would have ranked 18th in the NFL this year. So let's talk about the other major factor here, and that is the quarterback. I mean, this hire was so interesting to me, Shayne. Not that you make that decision based on what the Steelers have, because they might not have anything going for them. But Kenny Pickett is not an under center quarterback. He's not a play action quarterback. He never has been. You can go back to his best days with Mark Whipple in Pitt. And he's always been a guy that's done his best work out of shotgun. And so it makes it interesting from that standpoint right there. And even Mason Rudolph, if the Steelers elect to bring him back, he's that big bodied quarterback who kind of fits like the Tannehill mold a little bit, that type of player. But even he doesn't have a lot of experience working under center, working with these play action passes. If you recall, his whole college career was all spread offense and everything.
In the Big 12, it was just
that's all the Big 12. That's all the Big 12 is. So it makes me wonder, Shayne, do the Steelers have a different plan here at quarterback? Are they going to try to take these guys that have been in the league a couple years to a handful of years now and turn them into something that they haven't been so far? Or do they have a plan to go out and get a quarterback that fits what Arthur Smith wants to do?
I think the funny thing about that is I think there's certain elements of especially Kenny's game that I think makes sense with Arthur Smith. And the main one is the ability to prevent turnovers, to limit turnovers. Because you can look at the Falcons' tenure and say, oh, well, his offenses were bad. And they were overall. But if you look at the way he tried to use his players, as much as people try to argue about like the Bijan Robinson thing, Kyle Pitts, like overall, their total touches and targets were not bad. Could they have been better? Yes. Could they have been better managed? Sure. But he tried to get the ball to his playmakers. The problem is he had Desmond Ridder, a quarterback, who was seemingly determined to give the ball to the team as often as possible. That was, I think, the biggest limiting factor to his Falcons offense. Not so much his inability to call plays or the talent around his quarterback, but the quarterback itself. And you could say, well, Kenny Pickett's not good either. And I would say so far, absolutely. The thing he is much better, though, at is not throwing the ball to the other team and not coughing up the ball constantly. And in his offense, that might be enough as the quarterback to be relatively successful. Now, am I expecting him to suddenly throw for 30 touchdowns or even close to 4,000 yards? Probably not, right? But I think he could fit well just because of his mentality as a quarterback. And then Mason, he's a veteran. I think he can handle that type of thing if you ask him to. So if it ends up with a competition between those two, I think one of them will be able to be competent. Again, though, are we looking for competent? No, not particularly. At least I'm not. I know you're not either. I think in the draft, especially if you're looking for quarterbacks, there are some that would fit this system pretty well, but are you willing to take one high enough for it to be an upgrade, or are you just taking one that is a better fit but may not be an actual upgrade overall? That's kind of where I think the bringing in a new quarterback thing, it's totally possible. The one thing I don't want to see is Tannehill come here and compete. I really don't care to see that at this point. But that is a little bit of a concern of mine, that he might say, hey, let me bring in my boy Ryan. I can have him, he doesn't have to necessarily start or anything, but and then starts there, then he ends up starting games, and it's just a mess. So
Yeah.
overall, I don't think he'll bring in a new quarterback that is guaranteed to start over those two guys, but I also think that one of them also might just be a decent fit ultimately.
Yeah, that would scare me a little bit too. I got to
Yeah.
admit, you bring in a Tannehill who's turning, I think he turns like 20 or 36 years
I
old
think he's going to
this
be
offseason.
36. Yeah, 36.
So and just been sitting there for a little bit. I don't know. I mean, the other question though I'd have to ask, and it makes me wonder if it's going through Tomlin's mind, if it's going through Arthur Smith's mind. Can you risk your reputation on Kenny Pickett? Like you trust him enough. And obviously Tomlin gave him a glowing review during his postseason press conference where he's like,
Yeah.
yes, the QB1 is on the roster. And so I'm interested to see, can this be a coach that revitalizes Pickett's career? I did not see Pickett at all in this type of offense. I got to be honest. Like when it from watching him in college until now, like I thought if he could make it work, it would be as the sitting in the pocket, kind of doing a little scrambling around, finding guys open, using his legs, that kind of stuff. Now, I think that it could work out potentially because if they make the reads simple enough for Pickett, I think doing the PA bootleg stuff, like that's the stuff that has me intrigued about this offense, where if you get him out on the move and give him a little bit of space, maybe he can find guys a little bit easier over the middle of the field. And so are they willing to risk potentially wasting a season, though, on a Pickett and Rudolph combination? And if neither of these guys work with Arthur Smith, that's why I think that the hiring is so interesting, because neither of these guys have played in an offense that even remotely resembles this before. And so it makes me wonder if they will at least go out and get one other quarterback who has been in an offense like this. And again, I think that the name we have to throw out here once more is Justin Fields. Like this is a guy that's going to become available. I'd have to imagine that they're probably dialing themselves in to Caleb Williams as we speak right now. And so I think it was Benjamin Albright maybe who said that the asking price will probably be a second, potentially a pair of seconds, and maybe even a second and a future third gets it done for a guy like Justin Fields, who again will be in need of a contract at some point here. Is the upside of getting a player with that much potential, if you can revitalize his career, is that something that the Steelers would explore? And would it be something that can get them a win or two higher than what a Pickett would or what a Mason Rudolph would?
So that's a conversation obviously we haven't had much yet because we just hit the off season. But my problem ultimately is, well, I think he would fit that offense relatively well, and I think that's why until he was fired, especially the Falcons were an opening for Fields that made a lot of sense. Again, I think even more so than the two we already have, he is going to struggle in a drop back passing environment compared to even Tannehill and some other guys he's had in that offense, right? So the upside would be higher because as a runner, he could take advantage of if guys bite too much in play action and it's not there, though, even still he could take off and run. Like there's a lot of positive elements to his game, but again, you're going to have to pay him. So if you bring him in and he is great for the system, okay, great. Now you have a $40 million quarterback and a roster that is aging on defense and you don't have a ton of money. So good luck with that. Like I think the upside of that is not worth the potential downside of, even if it works for the first year, it could end up just leading to further problems down the stretch. I mean, look what happened when Daniel Jones had a mildly career year for the Giants, and then they gave him a bunch of money. Now his neck's messed up, and he was bad when he was out there. Like that scares me a little bit, admittedly.
Oh yeah, I understand that for sure. I'm intrigued by it, Shayne, because
I mean, I'm intrigued too,
think
for sure. It's just like,
but I'm also intrigued by any option that is not what the
mean,
Steelers currently
that's
have
also
in
fair
some
as well,
regard.
yeah.
So, but I can see, like, if we're being realistic here, I can see Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin potentially going with like a Jacoby Brissett or somebody that you can get in there to operate this offense, or like you said, Shayne, have him on the roster and kind of just develops from there and says, "Oh, Pickett, you're starting the season off, and it's kind of much
not
of the
doing
same the first
good,
2 years,
not doing
and
much.
here comes our backup quarterback, like we've seen before." So I can see a move there for sure. I mean, the Steelers made it clear they want to bring in quarterback competition, whether that will be through the draft or through free agency. I would have to imagine, being in their current state, I think it's almost more likely that they go the free agent option to save their draft capital elsewhere. But we'll see how that transpires here. Anything else you want to add about Arthur Smith before we move on to a different topic?
The last one, and it is kind of a mildly big one to me, especially if he isn't going to diversify it a little bit. His wide zone, especially aspect of his running game, is not the best fit for the Steelers personnel right now overall, especially running back. Like Warren, I think can do it because he has the burst and stuff to do that. But if he thinks he looks at Najee, who's similar size to Derrick Henry in terms of height and weight, Derrick Henry he is not right. This is not a facsimile for Derrick Henry. So I do worry a little bit about that, like, because our running game really took off once we delved into the gap and power runs, and that's when it really got good. And I hope he can come in and say, okay, I have a guy who can run wide zone because of his speed and burst in Jaylen Warren, but also have a guy who certainly probably can't do that very well, but is still valuable in other ways in Najee Harris. So if he can diversify his run game, I think it will be even better than it was last year. But there is a little bit of hesitancy on my side that he's going to do that based on his track record so far.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Shayne, because this is a good talking point. Pat Meyer runs a gap scheme, and so it's very different. And you're right. I don't think that Najee fits that personnel to be able to run that effectively too. You need to get quickness laterally before you go uphill and downfield. And so he's certainly not Derrick Henry in that regard, who can just blow past people. I mean, just so freakish, like a Jim Brown type.
There's a gear that Henry can reach that isn't human for someone of his size. That's the thing about him that made him so special with that, because it is still a more power oriented wide zone instead of the more Shanahan, like you want to get outside and try to find that cup. Like it is more of a power element to it. But whenever Henry gets up to speed, if they block it right, no one can catch him. Right, like we don't have that from Najee, right? We just don't. That's nothing against him. It's just not his game. So I hope that they, like you said, and I talked about, realize that about him and still allow him to be effective by playing to his strengths more.
And I love Arthur Smith's running scheme, but I would worry a little bit, Shayne, that the biggest strength that he brings in there, so again, something the Steelers are already good at, and they've showed it down the stretch each of the past 2 seasons. Could they go backwards potentially a little bit if they do try to learn a new scheme and they don't have the personnel for it? Maybe they backslide a little bit with the running game if they don't do it effectively or they don't find the right guys to bring in. And so that would worry me a little bit, because if the running game isn't working, Arthur Smith's offense isn't going to work. And so I feel like it is a big and important topic here. And I trust him to get it done, because he's got, again, 5-year sample of calling these plays and running an offense that has at the very least been very good at running the football. And so, but you do wonder if they do a shift in their offensive scheme and they want to do a little bit more of the wide zone stuff. That's not really Pat Meyer's forte. That's not how the Steelers have been succeeding. And so anytime there's change that way, when it's kind of like if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. Well, you're going to fix it anyway, because that's what Arthur Smith is here to do.
Right.
And so it just makes for an interesting scenario. And one more thing I want to point out, Shayne, there have been whispers out there. I mean, not any rumors or anything, but just from fans and some of the media saying, "Hey, Mike Munchak, I know that you're unemployed right now. You have worked, and yet Munchak overlapped with Arthur Smith for 3 years in Tennessee. Could he be a guy that they bring back in?" Early on, Gary Dulac is shutting this down a little bit here, saying that no, he doesn't think that's a possibility. The Steelers are content with Pat Meyer, and I understand what Meyer did. In the second half of the year, it was a lot more encouraging than what we've seen from him in the past. But I would tell you that I would kick Pat Meyer's butt out the door faster than anybody. If Munchak was willing to sign on, I mean, he's done just remarkable things. Almost has 3 decades of experience as an offensive line coach in the NFL. And what he did when he was here 2014 to 2018 with the Steelers, Alejandro Villanueva, Ramon Foster, David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey. Marcus Gilbert, like he was phenomenal, getting the absolute most out of his guys and turning like former undrafted guys into like Pro Bowl level players. Like this is what he does. This is his niche. He is one of the top, like if it's not him, maybe it's like Callahan. Like he is one of the top.
Howard, I would say Mudd, I think, was a guy too that was pretty good with that.
So then, I mean,
Yeah, it's just
Go
all
ahead.
those guys. Yeah.
At the very least, like I think that he is a top 3 in the NFL at what he does, and so yes,
Yeah.
I would kick Pat Meyer to the curb for him in a heartbeat if I could.
Yeah.
But by the early sounds of it, at least, it doesn't sound like the Steelers would be willing to do that. And who knows if Munchak would even be willing to come back
Right.
after sitting at home and being comfortable there as well.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And the more that you subscribe, the more content we can help bring to you guys. And if you are here joining us live, if you have any questions for Shayne and I, please drop them in the live chat. We would love to be able to get to some of your questions here. All right, Shayne, we're going to talk about the Senior Bowl going on in Mobile this week. I actually enjoy the practices more than the game. I think you can tell from them.
Find out more.
I have access to the Senior Bowl film, so I've been watching that play-by-play. O-line versus D-line is always a very telling drill down here in Mobile. And so it's I want to talk about this because such a big week in terms of what this team ultimately does in the NFL draft. We've seen them be enthralled with players down there before. And I think that we can get some really good insight just by watching these reps and seeing which players are performing at a high level, which ones are not meeting expectations. And so let's start off with the question, pretty basic here, Shayne, is which positions do you think that Mike Tomlin, Omar Khan, and the staff down in Mobile will be eyeing the most this week for the Senior Bowl?
Trenches are a big one, right? Offensive line, defensive line, those two are going to be big things that they're looking at. They always like looking at those guys in Mobile. It always feels like those are the standout kind of like where you can find some guys that maybe aren't being talked about a lot.
Yeah,
is in that group, right? Is in those two groups. So I think they're definitely looking at those, especially with the needs along the offensive line and honestly increasingly with the defensive line, because again, we have some question marks already on the team. Cam Hayward's long-term availability is kind of in question, of course, as he gets older. So both those groups are really important. And then for me, especially, I hope corner, right? Corner has to be something that they're looking at, especially if they decide to go offensive line early. They need to identify some guys that could possibly bring in on day 2 and day 3 that could potentially have an impact early on in the secondary. So, because we desperately need that as well.
Yeah, those are the two big ones for sure. And I'm sure that's where Steelers are going to have their eyes when they're down there this week. Let's talk about some of the standouts early on, Shayne. I don't know how much of a chance you've had to watch some of the Senior Bowl film that is out there, but I've ran through it and I wanted to highlight a few guys here, and then you can share your thoughts on them. The most impressive player so far through we're recording this like at the end of the second day of practice. And so I've got to see some things from the second day. I got to watch all the first day stuff. Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. This guy is a beast, and I'm so impressed by what he has done so far. Like, he doesn't give any ground in pass protection. He's driven people into the dirt. Like, initially, Shayne, I was hopeful that this would be a guy on the Steelers' radar in the second round. He's not making it there anymore. I think that he's going to. He has the potential to fall between their first and second round pick, and because centers don't get drafted as high as sometimes we think that they should, because even though I think he's the best center prospect in this draft, he still might fall to like beginning of the second round type of range. But I wouldn't be shocked, like the way that he's playing right now. I wouldn't be shocked if Pittsburgh had some first round consideration for him.
Yeah, and I think this is something that you have to think about too, is this is not a normal center prospect. And I don't mean that he's like head and shoulders above guys like Creed Humphrey, other guys that have come out in the last couple of years. It's that he is a legitimate rocked up 330-pounder who can play guard as well. Like, he could legitimately, I think, be a top of the line guard prospect if he didn't play center at all. And that's the difference, I think, as to why you could see him drafted late first round instead of where a lot of other centers go in the mid to late second round. Because if you have a center, right, if you decide, our center position is pretty strong, but this guy's on the board and maybe the center is aging, or he's a guy that maybe you do want to eventually replace, you can stick him at right or left guard. And I think he was going to be an immediate day one starter there too. Again, you just don't see centers with that size profile almost ever and have them be athletic enough to be a center as well. And he certainly is. Like, he has all the goods as a guy who can play the center position with the size and strength of a guy who is typically going to be one of the guards. So he's a unique prospect. And I think because of that, like I said, the Steelers, if they want him, it's likely going to be with either their first round pick if they think he's better than the tackles maybe that they could get at that point if they're looking offensive line, or a trade up or down, possibly even depending on how they want to play it.
Yeah, talk about an easy sell though for Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan.
Yeah, that's
You've
a
literally spent
Steeler.
you spent the last like 3 years watching Kendrick Green just get bullied into the pocket, and then the same with Mason Cole again last year. It's like this guy, that will not happen to him.
No,
if he'll lose, maybe it'll be from speed around the edge, not the best mover in space, which is understandable for like a 330
even then for 330 pounder, he's still better than he should be.
Yes, he is. And I've been
crazy.
super impressed so far. And you mentioned Creed Humphrey. It reminds me, different type of player, obviously.
Right.
Humphrey was that 100th percentile athlete guy, not quite as big, obviously, or powerful. But I remember watching every rep of Humphrey at the Senior Bowl, and I watched him back to back, all 3 practices. The guy barely lost a rep there. And I was very high on him. I believe I had Humphrey 23rd on my board. I was pushing hard for the Steelers to draft Humphrey or Landon Dickerson in 2021. They went with a running back, and we're not going to talk about that right now. And he's turned out to be a solid player, but the philosophy, it goes back to that philosophy again, Shayne. But
the philosophy.
I think that already, like, Jackson Powers Johnson is reminding me of kind of what Creed Humphrey was able to do. It's like when the offensive linemen look good, like every single rep, like your footwork's good, your power's good, you just manhandle the competition down at the Senior Bowl. That typically translates very well. And these guys typically turn out to be really good players in the NFL. And so I'm very encouraged by what I've seen from Jackson Powers Johnson right now. And if you're okay with another JPJ on the Steelers, but on the offensive side of the ball, and I think everybody would be. The question though becomes like, how does this value compare to other positions? Obviously, like tackle's in a nutshell, like tackle is a more important position than center. And I don't think anybody should argue against that. But is the tackle prospect you're going to get, is that better than the center? And it's a really good tackle class too. So I want to highlight some of these guys as well.
Tackle class, yeah. We'll get to them. Yeah.
Another name I wanted to highlight here, Shayne, this is a fun one, is Ladd McConkey. He's the wide receiver from Georgia. Maybe you've seen him so far. This guy just does a little bit of everything for you. He does it at a high level. And I think that he's potentially the biggest standout so far at the Senior Bowl among the wide receivers. Roman Wilson is the other one, the Michigan receiver who's been very solid, and that is to be expected. But McConkey is a guy that can play in the slot. He can play outside. His size came in good, as he's 5'11 and a quarter, 187 pounds. He's pretty rocked up. And he in some ways, he kind of reminds me of like that Deontay Johnson type player.
Yeah.
Maybe a better hands version of that guy though, where you can just do everything. The route running has been so crisp. The separation stuff it'll jop your draw. And so if you haven't watched Ladd McConkey play yet, go put on some of that film. And if you can't find any, just go to Twitter, search his name on there, because you'll see some really impressive routes. Like he's got like these whip routes and stuff that defensive backs can't stay with them. And obviously these drills, when you're doing one-on-ones,
you want to focus more on the guys who actually can handle receivers in these, and less so on the receivers beating corners. For sure, it's hard to.
It favors this type of player for sure. But if you go back and put on his Georgia film,
he did this stuff.
It's all really impressive stuff. And in Pro Football Focus has him as the 32nd overall player on their board. I don't think he gets drafted that high. I think he's a 2nd round pick. But the Steelers, like obviously they're in need for a receiver. They're going to cut Allen Robinson. You don't really have a number 3. Maybe this is a guy they love picking from Georgia. They picked 2 Georgia guys last year, so that you can bet your bottom dollar they will have everybody on hand at Georgia's Pro Day. And so this could be a name that they could be eyeing. So keep an eye on that one there. Quinyon Mitchell. This is another guy that's going to fall potentially in that range. Big athletic cornerback from Toledo. And so I caution a little bit, Shayne, about taking a non-power 5 guy in the first round. There will be some who will give him a glowing endorsement and say that he deserves to be a first round pick because of how good he is. He's a name among like 5 or 6 other cornerbacks that are in like that late first round, early second round consideration there. Did you get a chance to watch any of his Senior Bowl stuff so far? I think Shayne is frozen on me. There you go. Okay.
Oh, you good? Back?
Yeah, there was just a little lag. Go ahead.
Okay, we're good. Yeah, so I didn't watch his Senior Bowl film, but I did get a chance to take a look at him a little bit. I'm starting to watch players for the draft here coming up. So He's a guy that's interesting to me because he's not really a typical Steelers corner fit because he is definitely an off coverage type of guy. He doesn't have a lot of press reps, not a lot of man-to-man stuff. So it would be an awkward fit as far as looking at him for the Steelers, but elite athlete. And I think that's the thing that you wonder, like, can he maybe grow into doing some more versatility things as far as press and running true man? Like, he has the athleticism for it for sure. It's just they didn't really ask him to do that. And I think part of that is because when you have a guy that's this athletic, if you let him play off and let him just read the quarterback, that's when you have a lot of ball production. You have interceptions. I remember watching the Stock Exchange Draft podcast. You guys should definitely check that out if you want to see prospects and stuff. But they talked about there's a game, I forget against who he was playing, but there's a quarterback who just kept throwing him the ball for like no reason at all. It was like 4 picks in one game. And yeah, it's an outlier, but it just tells you like this is the type of player he is, right? He's a guy that wants to read what's going on and drive on the football with his athleticism. So
yeah, his Toledo film obviously shows that he was like a man among boys out there. And I'm kind of surprised that he didn't choose to transfer. I think it's because his home is right there. And so it might not hurt him at the end of the day because he's obviously been really good. And his stuff that I've seen in the first 2 days of practice here and stuff that was been posted today, it's been really impressive stuff. He had an awesome pick today where
I saw
the receiver perfectly and goes and snags the ball, just high points it in the middle of the end zone. And so I think that's a name to watch at least, because at the very least, even if he's not the perfect fit, we know that Tomlin does have at least some level of interest in MAC guys. I mean, Deontay Johnson came from Toledo, and he could fall in that range, the Steelers' late first round range where they're going to be selecting. Another guy, Shayne, that I've been impressed with so far is, I don't want to butcher this first name, Talise Fuaga.
Yeah, Talise Fuaga is how you say it. Yeah.
He is the big mammoth right tackle out there at Oregon State, I believe it is.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so he's been looking excellent at the Senior Bowl. Like, I feel like, again, if you want to take anything away from what happens during all of Senior Bowl week, my advice is watch what happens on the O-line versus D-line drills. Like, these to me are the most telling thing that goes on in mobile. And the guys that can dominate the one-on-ones and the O-line, D-line drills, they typically end up being solid players at the next level. And Fuaga is one of those guys that's looked really good so far, has buried some of the better pass rushers there in Alabama so far. And so I think that's a name to watch. Obviously, the Steelers have a need for, I would even go as far to say, a right tackle, because I would love to throw I'd love to throw Broderick Jones back at left tackle where he's more natural. Now, would they take a Big 12 guy? Would you take somebody, or a Pac-12 guy from in the first round where they will be picking? It's a little bit out of character for them, but at the same time, we do have a different front office here. They might not abide by all of the same former trends that we saw with Kevin Colbert there during his tenure. So a name to watch for sure, because again, another one of those late first round potential offensive tackles. Once the top guys kind of get wiped off the board, he could be maybe the next best of that group there.
I will say, from what I've heard from other people and from some of the top draft analysts, we might not have to worry about him because he might be gone in the first 10 to 15 picks. There's multiple people who have him ahead of Olufushanu, believe it or not, as a tackle. And now, granted, they're two very different players who play different roles, but Fuaga especially, like, he would be the perfect fit for what the Steelers want to do because he's a good pass protector. I would say that he has his flaws because he just is more of a mauling guy. But if you want to run the football, you can run the football behind this guy for sure. So, like, that combination would be fun. I don't know if he'll be in range to do that or if we'll be in range to get him based on what I've heard. But if he maybe has a rough combine or something knocks him down, I'll take him in a heartbeat at 20.
Oh yeah. I mean, he certainly looks the part for sure. I mean, doesn't lack in power. He's a guy that would be an ideal fit probably for what the Steelers need. And so check out his film if you get a chance. Roman Wilson's a name that I've already mentioned once on here. Just a solid all-around player. I think that he's going to be a good player. And I don't think the Steelers are going to take a receiver that high in the draft. They're not going to have enough interest for that. And then Tyler Guyton is the last name that I wanted to highlight. And again, we're still very early on in this process. Between now and next week's show, I'm going to do a lot more Senior Bowl film watching. And so I'll be able to tell you a few more guys next week. But Guyton has looked phenomenal so far. A little sloppy in his footwork, but has brute strength, ideal size for the right tackle position. I think he would be an awesome fit. Broderick, in some ways, in terms of his play style, where he just has that physicality and just bully you at the point of attack. type mentality. So he's been excellent. And I would go as far to say is he might be the second best player, maybe only behind Jackson Powers Johnson, just because I've been so impressed with every single rep that he's had so far.
He's something else.
So obviously, we're less than halfway through. We're going to go back and I will get a chance to watch today's Senior Bowl tape, tomorrow's Senior Bowl tape. And when we reconvene on the podcast next week, I'll be able to share more insight with you there as well. And any other comments that you need to get to, Shayne?
There was a couple that we have from our good friend, R Barley 18, who always likes to chime in. He's talking about the center from LSU, Charles Turner. Didn't get a chance to watch him at all yet, so I'm not familiar with him. Just talking about the offensive line situation and coaching. Yeah. Again, if we're truly like, if Munchak would come back, you should do it. If he isn't going to, and again, maybe we have no idea if he would even be interested, right? Like, we don't know that. So it is funny to think about if we didn't take that opportunity if he was available. But the only other thing I want to mention with Guyton is he is probably one of the better athletes to tackle those come out in the last 5 years. And you wonder, like, with that type of athletic profile, is he going to work out almost just kind of by default to a certain degree, just even if he kind of relies just on that athleticism, right? Because when you're that athletic at tackle, there's certain things that you're going to be able to do that other guys just physically cannot prepare for. It's like pass rushers or as run defenders trying to deal with you. Like, he's certainly a fun player. And I think how well he performs at the combine, at Senior Bowl the rest of the way, in pro days, he could end up getting up into close to the first round, even though right now he's more of a second round type of guy.
Yeah, and I think that he's going to be a fast riser if I had to guess, Shayne, because of the Senior Bowl film and just the traits that he possesses, the brute strength that he has at that size. And I think that, again, that we could be looking at a guy that's right in that range, fits a position of need for the Steelers. So keep your eye on him as well. Any other names that you wanted to highlight, Shayne?
For now, no. I need to get back into watching some more of the guys before we do.
I do want to talk. I want to spend a minute to talk about the quarterbacks here before we end up signing off for today. There are some fun quarterbacks down in Mobile this year. Obviously, you have Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix. You got Spencer Rattler down there. Which of the quarterbacks of this group that's down in Mobile, Shayne, do you think would fit best for what Arthur Smith wants to do on offense? If the Steelers were to go with that, maybe say on like a day 2 pick.
I think of the guys that are down there, probably Nix, because he has a good balance of tools from an athletic standpoint. He's a good thrower of the football overall. He's very much gotten used to playing within structure at Oregon after having a really wild, chaotic career at Auburn before that. I think he'd be the most seamless fit. I think Penix's arm talent would make the play action game very interesting because you could really take some deep shots down the field with him. But his athleticism is kind of limited, I think, from the injuries he sustained in his career, which is unfortunate. He had some more wheels to him, I think, back in his Indiana days, but at this point, it's just not quite the same. And then Rattler's a guy that I'm really interested in watching once I get to him, because right now I'm starting with the consensus top like 6 quarterbacks or so, and I've gotten through half of them so far. But he's a guy that he has the talent, I would say, as a thrower especially. It's just, can he keep his head on straight? Because there's some issues with that at Oklahoma and stuff like that. Like, he's a guy that I'm curious about as well, though.
Yeah, Rattler's had a really interesting career path. Obviously, got benched to Oklahoma for Caleb Williams, didn't get his job back, had to enter the transfer portal, went to South Carolina, had a bit of a rough year, but I think that he really bounced back nice.
From what I've heard, too.
Yeah. And this year, at least, and I don't know about his leadership. I can't speak to all that kind of stuff, but I went and put a few games of his on just the other day, and I was impressed by some of the stuff he was able to do, being outmatched in talent in a lot of these games, playing in the SEC, just making some really nice throws. And so that one has me intrigued, like as like a mid-round flyer. Maybe he goes like in the 3rd round ish range.
Yeah, he has the tools to make good on, like, if he can figure out the stuff that's limited him in college, he would be one of those guys that could return value as like a mid-round pick and end up being better than that.
Yeah, and as far as Arthur Smith's offense goes, though, like, he's always had like these bigger bodied type quarterbacks. I mean, like Ryan Tannehill's like the 6'5" guy. Does he want somebody in that mold? Because if he does, there's not a lot of quarterbacks in Mobile that really fit that profile there. Maybe like a Michael Penix, but he's always kind of played in a different style of offense too. And so I'll be interested to see. At least I know that people are like, oh, Mike Tomlin has met with Bo Nix. Well, he went over and shook Bo Nix's hand. I don't know. They'll probably get these formal meetings. I'm sure they will get these formal meetings going around. But I'll be interested to see throughout this process, how much interest will the Steelers ultimately have in the quarterback position?
That is going to
That's the
be
biggest
very
question
fun to see
that we want to figure out. One more comment here. Patrick Paul has looked. So I hit it twice here. Patrick Paul has looked awful too. Pat Paul is a really interesting guy because
he's a
just
hulking,
freakish size like this.
Hulking
Houston tackle. He's like 6'7", 335 pounds, freakishly long arms.
Oh yeah.
But he needs to increase his lower body strength. He does get moved too easily. But the movement skills for a man his size are really impressive. And so I'll be really interested
for sure.
Yes, for sure. And I want to track him throughout this process to see where he's going to end up going and what kind of grade I'll ultimately end up having on him. Intriguing prospect for sure. That was the big news for today. Shayne, obviously the Arthur Smith, the Steelers at the Senior Bowl. Anything else you want to touch on before we end up signing off today?
No, I think, again, Senior Bowl, we'll see how it plays out the rest of the week. I'm curious how we see guys. I think Jackson Power Johnson, according to what I saw, might be kind of bowing out because I think he kind of proved his point from what I heard. I don't know if it's an injury. I hope it's not, but I think he didn't practice the back half of the day, so we'll see if he comes back out there. But he's one of those guys where he could probably just say, yeah, I proved my point. I can just chill out for now, probably.
Yeah, and it would do it for different reasons than what Dawan Jones did last year. Is like, I'm tired.
Yeah, I need a break.
No, I will be sure between now and next week's show, we'll get caught up on all this film. I've got a couple friends down there that are going to get some inside stuff as well. And so we will reconvene next week and possibly do Tuesday's show as well. So we'll plan on going live on Tuesday. You can join us live every single Wednesday for this show at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. If we do our Tuesday show, it will be at the same time. Thank you all for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.